It is the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Suggestions. And one of the things that bothers me so much about the left is they don't seem to understand that difference. And we know from prior, in fact, recent Supreme Court precedent, that the right to carry and bear arms is a fundamental right of individual liberty.
Hey, guess what? I've got your favorite Montenegrin lawyer back on the show today, and my great friend, and of course I'm talking about Mark Brnovich. That's who I'm talking about, my good friend Mark Brnovich. And there are tons of big legal cases in the country right now that we're going to talk about. And we're also going to talk about the one investigation that Mark Brnovich regrets, the one that he didn't do while he was the attorney general in Arizona. And guess what? It has to do with UFOs. It's the one he regrets. You are not going to want to miss this. And by the way, Speaker McCarthy just announced impeachment proceedings against President Biden last week. That's pretty big. What's going to happen there? Do you think it's actually going to happen? I don't think the Senate's going to make a move on that. I brought in the expert, and I'm so excited to share this interview with you. So let's get right into it. So, okay, I'm here. I've got one of my most, I would think one of my favorite guests. You're my favorite, one of my favorite guests. I know other people are going to be like, Sarah, you can't say that because that's going to like ostracize others. No, it won't. No, it won't. You're fun. I love talking to you. You not only know the law, but you love Star Wars. You don't mind talking to me about UFOs, which I think is becoming more and more common now. Congress is holding hearings on it now without any reservation. They're not like sneaking back and trying to pretend to have hearings and laughing about it in the corner, but they're very serious about it. And you're also right now, you're in Arizona, great state of Arizona. We were just talking about how crazy it was for both of us when we were in New York City. And just, these radical Democrat run cities where it's like everything has changed so much since the Biden administration has come into play. I mean, and since COVID, I have to be honest here, also since COVID, where we saw a shift in like what's happened in our cities, job loss, small businesses closing down. But you were just telling me and describing a little bit of New York. And as much as we both love that city, I mean, there's a lot of problems there, a lot of homelessness, a rise in crime.
Yeah, and Sarah, you always like throw a lot of stuff out there, so I feel like I need to say something first about UFOs. So this is a true story. So when I was still Attorney General, like I've been fascinated by UFOs. And so when I was a kid growing up, there was a famous incident. This guy Travis Walton that was abducted or said he was abducted. They even did a movie about it. But on 5 days. And so when I became AG, I said I wanted to go back and reopen that investigation and look at those files. And all the people in the office were like, don't ever say that. Don't ever do that. People are going to think you're crazy. So I kind of let it go. And so now that we keep hearing about all these stories and stuff, that's one of my regrets as AG is not reopening the Travis Walton investigation. So I do regret that because I do think there's something there.
I think you brought up such an important story. And for those of you who don't know about Travis Walton's story, it was an abduction that did take place in Arizona in the mountains. They were loggers. A group of loggers that had gone up into the mountains, and Travis Walton ran after a light. They were in a truck. It was late at night. They saw these lights in the sky. They decided to stop and investigate. Travis Walton and his group all ran out to go see what it was. They could not describe what they were seeing. It was according to their story, a ship, some type of UFO. They didn't know. It didn't look like anything that had come from Earth. There was a light that was bright and coming down on them. And Travis Walton was actually taken. That's their story. And they tried to blame the loggers for killing him or disposing of the body. They thought that maybe they were involved in some kind of crime. And then what happened? Like days later, Walton...
5 days. My memory serves me. I did not bone up on this, but I think it was 5 days later. And I do remember he passed a polygraph.
Correct.
And, so where did he go for 5 days? And anyway, so yes, it's, like I said, I wish I had opened up those files or reopened that investment.
Why didn't you ever talk to me about this? I would have talked you into it. I would have.
I know. I wish we had talked about this years ago, but you got to remember, this, Sarah, just recently, the Pentagon has finally started releasing, information, we've talked about this off the air about, some of the things the pilots have seen, but a lot of that stuff is 15, 20 years old.
Correct.
And so, and of course, there's people in the military that'll say like, well, we're not sure if that's, some sort of new Russian or Chinese technology. But the reality is that there's nothing that, and we are the most advanced country aerodynamically. There's nothing that we do that even comes close to that stuff. And I do think that there's some stuff like when they were developing, stealth technology and, the B-2 and, even back in the day with the SR-71, there's a lot of things that people mistook for UFOs, which were indeed government aeronautic projects. But the reality is if you talk to, and I know you do, people in the military, people that are around this, there are some things that just are unexplainable, and they will tell you are not of this earth.
Yeah, I'll tell you this before we move on to any other subject, because I think this is fascinating, and I know that our listeners and all of you out there have been so responsive to all the shows that I've done on the unidentified flying objects or aerial phenomena when I bring people on from NASA or experts in the field like Nick Pope and others, and of course you, Mark Brnovich, the former Attorney General. I mean, this is not, this is no longer in the realm of sci-fi. This is in the realm of of the reality of the world that we live in. We live in a vast universe with billions and billions of stars and galaxies and solar systems. And I think, have come to a point where we realize that there is a very good chance with all of these possibilities that are out there of planets sustaining life, that we're not the only intelligent organisms or beings in the universe, that there may be others. And what you said was interesting. There are some in the military that keep throwing out here and there, not as much as before, saying, well, this could be Chinese technology. This could be technology from our Russian competitors or Israel or somebody else. Well, I have a booklet here, right here, Mark. These are all of the classified, now declassified documents, some of them in black, some of them not, from the CIA and other agencies going back into the 1930s, where they're describing the exact same ships. The exact same, these tic-tac-like looking vehicles that are moving at speeds that are unheard of, 700 to 900 Gs, that appear to be flying near our military installations or that were spotted. So unless the Chinese Communist Party, Mao Zedong, and whoever was in charge back then had that technology, I don't think it's theirs, because it's been around and been described by our military for the last 50 to 70 years.
Well, people forget, and I can't remember if you and I have talked about this off the air, but people forget the Foo Fighters, not the rock and roll band, but the Foo Fighters came out of World War II, where the pilots would be flying and they would notice like these orbs flying around them, and they called them Foo Fighters because they didn't know what they were. And that's actually where the term came from, which of course became a hit band. And so,
that's such a great band, such a great name too, the Foo Fighters.
And you didn't even have me on there to talk about this. This is how we end up going off on tangents. It's kind of like a Grateful Dead concert where who knows which direction we're going to go. Because
I love it.
I was just speaking of visiting this planet. You and I were talking off the air about my last visit to New York.
Right. Which sometimes can feel like you're on an alien planet.
No, I was going to say, and I don't mean this in any sort of disrespectful way to anyone, but we as a nation have started defining deviancy down. We've normalized deviancy. And so when you do that, you end up getting more of any sort of activity. And so what we've seen, and it doesn't matter where you're at, I've seen this in Arizona. I know you've seen it in Texas. I know that people have seen it all over the country. In places like California, New York, it has gotten out of control. And when I was there, I mean, it was heartbreaking in a lot of ways to think, this is this represents capitalism, the height of capitalism in the world, New York City, and you're walking around and there's literally people sprawled out in the streets and people just kind of walk over them, don't pay attention. People that are high, people that are in various states of undress, people urinating in the corner. I mean, it's just it's crazy. And the fact that people just kind of go by and try to ignore it until every once in a while some person high on crack or meth or something pushes someone, God forbid, off a subway platform or attacks someone. A lot of the stuff people just ignore, and it really is a problem in our society. And I think it indicates, one is, as you normalize any abnormal behavior, you're gonna see more of it. So there are people, I think, that just say, screw it. I don't want to be part of society. I'm going to do this. I think there's a lot of people, most of the people have significant mental health issues that aren't being addressed. You have a significant portion of people that have, drug problems, and, and instead of coddling them or giving them free needles and, whatever, we should be addressing the underlying problems, and we're not. So instead you're seeing more of it. And now you literally have apps in places like the Bay Area where they can tell you where you need to walk to avoid human defecation. I mean, think about that.
I downloaded that app. I downloaded that app where, because I wanted to see what...
Some guy's dropping a pony loaf in the street. I mean, it's bad enough if people won't pick up after their dogs. I mean, it's crazy.
I saw that with my own eyes, Mark. I saw that with my own eyes. I saw it several times when I was in the Bay Area, as well as when I was in California, in the Los Angeles area. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing, because sometimes it's hard to grasp that reality, that's happening right in front of you, that we no longer live in some of our cities in a civil society where just anything goes. And even the police, unfortunately, and I'll ask you about this because I think this happens when you have bad district attorneys that are being, pushed by, backed by Soros for no bail, low bail. They're not bringing charges against what they consider to be lower crimes, misdemeanors. They take felonies, turn them into misdemeanors. They don't want to prosecute people that are on the street. And I think that allowing people to get away with even small crimes like thievery and robbery and, purse snatching or whatever they're doing on the streets, it just elevates the crime level in the city, because they're like, whoa, I can get away with this. I can get away with anything. And they start getting away with anything.
And this, to me, as you know, I'm a big rule of law person, and fundamentally, the rule of law is all about you need to have consistency and certainty in the application of law. And the reality is, and James Q. Wilson wrote a book about this called The Broken Windows Theory. I don't think I have that on my bookshelf behind me, but the book is amazing. And it's actually one of the things that people like Rudy Giuliani, when he was mayor of New York City, did, is they implemented those policies. And basically the broken windows theory is that if you allow little crimes to go, vagrancy, public urination, people not paying for the subway, not prosecuting people for graffiti, for breaking windows, essentially, what ends up happening is it sends a message to the broader society that people kind of don't care. And then you literally will see more and more major crimes until something becomes, a crime-infested neighborhood. And it all starts with, vagrancy and, breaking windows and not prosecuting those crimes. So I'm a big believer that especially if you have a law in the books, you have to aggressively prosecute what someone may call a smaller crime, like hopping over the subway turnstile, or, urinating in public, or, vagrancy, things like that.
But sometimes that leads to rape. Sometimes that leads to rape. Well, people don't understand. Exposure.
That's what I'm saying.
Yep.
Those little crimes end up creating a culture where criminality is accepted, where deviancy is accepted. And then you start to see more and more of that. It's almost like a Lord of the Flies situation. And so one of the things that, we as a society have to do is not only prosecute those types of crimes, but what the left has actually taken that in the opposite direction. Not only do they not want to prosecute, vagrancy or public urination or, those types of crimes, what the left has said is that, well, in places like Cook County or in California, they're not going to prosecute crimes if they're under $1,000, for example. So what's happened is you start to see this rash of crimes where people go into stores, they engage in organized retail theft, and they'll start stealing, hundreds and hundreds of dollars of stuff. They don't get prosecuted, and then they progress to thousands and thousands of dollars of stuff. And then what you end up having is this culture where district attorneys won't prosecute cases, for political reasons, essentially. And so you start to see more and more of that. I mean, think about that. I mean, look, I'm a first-generation American, as you know, a public school kid. $1,000 is so much money to people like me, my mom, and people I know, people who live in my middle-class neighborhood. And to think that some district attorney somewhere is saying, oh, well, if you steal 1,000, that's okay. That's no big deal. And as you know, it doesn't stop at 1,000. Then it becomes more and more, the gangs become empowered, the criminals become empowered, and then they start doing more and more crime, and they start carrying more and more guns, and then people start getting killed. And this is the natural progression of where these left-wing policies go when it comes to law and order.
Such a great point, because I also believe that it spills over. Like a lot of us, we think, people throughout the country, maybe flyover country, people say that, about the Midwest. We think, you know what, that's not going to come to my town. We're not going to have that problem here. We're going to let New York deal with New York. We're going to let LA deal with LA. But in the end, it spreads. It spreads across the entire nation. We're seeing kids now, even here in Texas. I just got a notice yesterday. It was a breaking news notice in Kyle, not too far from where I live, which is close to Austin, that there were a few kids at the high school. At first, I think they thought it was a lot more that had come in contact with fentanyl. A lot of kids in that area, that's been an area known for having fentanyl, where children over the last year have OD'd on drugs that have unfortunately been tampered with, that have fentanyl in them. These kids don't know it. They end up taking it. They die. They OD. We're seeing in Austin, very much similar to what we've seen in San Francisco and Oakland, a rise in crime, people on the streets, heroin use. But you could go down to Dayton, Ohio. You could go to small rural communities across America, in Pennsylvania, everywhere, where you're seeing a growing number of problems that we've seen in the city now being pushed across the nation. And I think that it is a big wake-up call for Americans. Like everything that we're going through, Mark, has to be a wake-up call. Like we need to start speaking out. We need to start addressing these issues, even if they're in New York, even if they're in our big cities, before they reach our small towns and our communities. And our cities should mean as much.
Well, the fundamental reason why people enter the social compact, you go back to not only the founding of this country, but you go back to, Rome and ancient times, pick your, era. But people enter the social compact because the primary function of government is to keep people safe and to protect their rights and liberties. And that's why, we entered into this, the social compact that, was the Constitution. And so the reality is that because of the way the world is, because of the way the United States is, nothing stays confined to one area, especially when it comes to law and order. And as you know, I was a prosecutor, I was a federal prosecutor. And one of the things that you and I have talked about so many times over the years, and you may remember when I was sounding the alarm on the border crisis, especially when Joe Biden became president, was talking about not only the record amount of people coming into the country illegally, but the record amount of drugs. And I kept saying, this constitutes an invasion, that the cartels have seized operational control, and you're empowering and enriching the cartels. And so whether it's the cartels south of the border or whether it's the inner city gangs here in the United States, what happens is when there's more crime, that means the cartels make more money, or the gangs make more money. They become more powerful. They seize more control. They can intimidate their neighborhoods. They can end up, even seizing political power sometimes. And so, I remember a few years ago, you may remember when I was still AG, when I issued that opinion saying what was happening on our southern border constituted an invasion.
Yes.
I got ripped. I got ripped by a lot of moderates. I got ripped by the left, by the Democrats, by the mainstream media. And the reality is now, as I kept saying, every state will become a border state. Now you have these same people in places like New York City that wanted to become sanctuary cities are now complaining and, bitching about, people coming in that are illegal. And they say that they can't afford it. And I'm thinking like, well, what about Arizona? What about Texas? For years, we've had to bear the brunt, hospital costs in local communities, tens of millions of dollars, education costs, healthcare costs, housing costs. So we as taxpayers are supposed to take it. And what bugs me as an Arizonan is you now have Democratic governor, Democratic AG who are afraid or unwilling to say anything contrary to the Biden administration's talking points. And so we still have an invasion in places like Arizona. The irony is some left-wing mayors and states are finally recognizing it. But we have allowed the cartels to seize control of our southern border and the gangs to seize control of our big cities in America. And that's dangerous. And unless we do something about it quickly, Sarah, more and more of our kids our sons, daughters, nieces, nephews, neighbors, friends will die.
I couldn't agree with you more, Mark. And I was just in New York dealing with that, talking to folks in the school system there that's already imploding. They got over 10,000 illegal migrants, and I completely, a month coming in, and I completely agree with you that the problem is that Democratic leadership, even in New York, Governor Kathy Hochul, she's not pointing the finger where she needs to point it at. It's not at Governor, Abbott. It's not at, Ron DeSantis for sending people their way. It's really at President Biden's open border policy. I did want to ask you about another governor, though, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, who issued that executive order on Friday, basically suspending or halting the Second Amendment. It was so bizarre. It was like an emergency order. Now a judge has temporarily halted her attempt to do this. And so what is going on here? And why do you think she moved in this direction? Especially, I know Albuquerque, they have a lot of issues with gangs and stuff, but people who have a legal right to access to carry a firearm aren't the problem. It's the people that get the guns off the streets that are just the criminals that that they don't care. They're not going to go apply for a license for a gun, for concealed carry. They're not going to do what I do and go down to the gun range and, work with a trained person and, learn how to use a weapon and carry it legally. So what is she doing?
Well, let's begin with what everyone needs to understand that's listening to this. It is the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Suggestions. And one of the things that bothers me so much about the left is they don't seem to understand that difference. And we know from prior, even in fact, recent Supreme Court precedent that the right to carry and bear arms is a fundamental right of individual liberty. And we know that, just common sense wise, in case people are listening to this or don't know a lot about our backgrounds, but look, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Suggestions, there's all these protections for individuals against encroaching government, whether it's the First Amendment, protecting your speech and liberty, whether it's the Second Amendment, your right to defend yourself and bear arms, whether it's, against quartering of soldiers, whether it's the Fourth Amendment, against government searches and seizures. The Bill of Rights is all about protecting individual liberty. And the framers understood how fundamental these rights were. And I would just add, the Brnovich caveat to all that is that any president or any governor that thinks they can restrain your constitutional rights, especially your Second Amendment rights, that they have the power to do so, does not understand the difference between citizens and subjects. And that's one of these fundamental things about the United States of America is that we are citizens. It is a government for the people, by the people. The framers created a framework where our fundamental liberties were protected because they understood those were God-given individual rights. And so when you ask what's going through the head of the Democratic governor or some of these, left-wing senators or, the Biden administration folks, I think they have a failure fundamentally to understand what the Constitution is and is about. And secondly, this is that old saw. It's kind of that neo-Marxist vision where you get these left-wing folks that believe they know what's best for people. And if only you have the right people in charge, whether it's the bureaucratic class or this leadership, they will tell you what's good and what's right.
Well, you've got the Rob Reiners. You've got the Rob Reiners of the world and them who are saying, like, look, the Constitution is antiquated. We've been, that the U.S. Constitution is antiquated, that we shouldn't have this Second Amendment. They believe these radical Marxists or whatever they are, however they want to describe themselves, they believe that wholeheartedly. And I wonder, and I was going to ask you this, do you think it has something to do as well with they do this emergency health order, which is kind of what happened in COVID. We saw them utilize this health order to remove our constitutional rights. And I'm wondering the expansion of that. Did COVID kind of set a standard for removing constitutional or our Bill of Rights from us? What's going on here?
Yeah, I'm really, really glad you brought this up. And, a couple things. One is, if you may recall, I was the first attorney general in the entire country that sued the Biden administration saying that what they were doing was unconstitutional. And if you may remember, I got attacked viciously by people. I had reporters here locally, nationally attacking me saying, oh my gosh, you're anti-science and everything else. And I tried to explain to them, look, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. I'm a lawyer, but I understand the Constitution. And where in this Constitution does it give a president or any political leader some sort of extraordinary powers just because there's a quote unquote health crisis? And I said, in times of crisis, in times of danger, that's when we need to protect our constitutional rights the most, because the framers once again understood you have to be wary of this kind of tyranny of the majority. And what we saw is people, if you disagreed at all, and I kept saying it's up to individuals. They can make their own individual health choices, but the federal government cannot mandate it. And that's what they were doing. And I don't know if folks remember, or maybe you can post it or people can look up. There's a famous clip where I was at a press conference when I filed this lawsuit, and I was going back and forth with the reporters. And the reporters were asking me, all of like attacking me on the science and all this other stuff. And I said, let me ask you a question. Have you ever had an STD? And all of a sudden they're like, oh, there's like the hush of the room.
I do remember that. I do.
I go, this is a legitimate question, because if you start saying for public health reasons, the government can take all this sort of power, I mean, can Joe Biden tell you, because we're worried about an AIDS crisis or STD crisis, can the federal government tell you you can have sex or not have sex, or who you can have it with? We have an obesity crisis, and heart disease kills so many people in this country every year. Does that mean the federal government can say, oh, we're going to stop letting you eat Mexican food and Big Macs? I mean,
no, I believe that will happen. Look, the Nuremberg, it is happening. And I think they're going to tax people that they feel are not healthy enough. And I think they're going to make life miserable for people that don't follow their rules. What about, the Nuremberg Health Convention, the Nuremberg Code?
So when I worked at the Goldwater Institute, when I was doing, I'm a big property rights guy, because once again, I understand the importance of property rights, private property rights, and their relationship to liberty and political freedom. And I oppose smoking bans. And I used to write a lot about the importance of property rights, how an owner puts time, effort, money into their restaurant or their business. The market will sort these things out, whether you should have smoking bans or not. And people would attack me. Oh my gosh, it's terrible. I got in debates with the American Heart Association. I was like, I'm not advocating people smoke. I'm advocating for private property rights. Right. And I used to say, and you probably heard me say this words, I used to say, Lyndon Johnson used to say, if you let a bull in your front yard, next day he's on your porch, the day after that he's shacking up with your wife. But he used a different term for that, and so the point is that once you start ceding out authority to government, where does it stop? And I said at the time, I said, look, what's next? Are they going to tell us how much caffeine we can have in our drinks, how much salt we can have in our food? And people are like, oh, that's ridiculous. And of course, 15 years later, that's exactly what we're seeing, this march towards this kind of collectivist mentality where I think the left is, I don't say training us, but they're getting people used to, especially people like our kids or the younger generation, used to kind of depending on the government telling you when it's safe, when it's not safe. Trust Uncle Joe. He'll tell you what to put in your body, what not to put in your body. And I think that's really dangerous, and it's fundamentally un-American. And when I say un-American, what I mean by that is that this is a nation forged on liberty and individual rights, and it's the antithesis of collectivism. But what we are seeing now is, I think the left is strategically trying to, whether it's at our public schools, whether it's over healthcare issues, all these issues even related to the Second Amendment guns, they are trying to make a whole generation dependent on centralized authority in the government for letting them know when it's safe and when it's not safe. And as I said, I think that's fundamentally anti-American and anti-liberty.
It really is. And I think that we saw already where the direction that our nation was heading in out of fear when COVID became like such a predominant part of our lives, that we were locked down and shut down for years. The world felt the wrath of that. That could be a whole other show in and of itself. But what's important there is that you're absolutely right, Mark. We saw how far the government could go and how much the collective was willing to let the government do without even questioning. We didn't even question the science, and science is all about questioning it and about getting to the facts and about understanding it. And to this day, we don't even have the answers. Even Senator Rand Paul is like, we don't even know exactly what happened at Wuhan laboratories, exactly what we were infected with, what is going on in the world with this. And we allowed, the government to seize control. Allegiance Gold. I talk about Allegiance Allegiance Gold. I thank Allegiance Gold every day for being a sponsor of the Sarah Carter Show. Thank you so much for making this show possible. And right now, you can get $5,000 of free silver for being a Sarah Carter listener on a qualifying purchase when you tell them that I sent you. All you have to do is say, hey, Sarah sent me, and you will get $5,000 of free silver on a qualifying purchase. Think about that. My friends at Allegiance Gold can help you protect your IRA or your 401k. And what do I say all the time? Diversify, diversify, diversify. You can protect that IRA, that 401k with physical gold and silver, or have it delivered securely right to your front door. They will educate you on the benefits of physical gold because guess what? They care and they want to build a long-term relationship with you. So right now, get $5,000 of free silver on a qualifying purchase when you tell them that I sent you. So don't wait, call or click today, 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA, S-A-R-A, no H, or go to protectwithsarah.com. We can't control the Biden administration, folks, but guess what? We can prepare. 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA, S-A-R-A, or go to protectwithsarah.com.
So when I was running for the Senate, when I was still AG, and everywhere you go, people film me left, right, and someone asked me about my lawsuit on the vaccines. And I started off, I gave because I never use notes even here, and I just kind of go from, I know what I believe, why I believe it. So I was like, look, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, but here's what I know is someone that breaks down questions in a legal kind of way. We were originally told, don't wear a mask. Then we were told, wear a mask. Then we were told masks are this effective, that effective. We were originally told, hey, get the vaccine. It doesn't matter whether it was discovered or made in some record amount of time. Get it. It's 90% effective. And then we were told, oh, wait a minute. Now you got to get boosters. Then we were told, oh, wait a minute. It's only 60% effective. And then the Wall Street Journal starts doing stories. It's only 40% effective. And oh, you can still get it and spread it after 6 months. And so, I was saying, look, I'm not a doctor and a scientist. But everything, I know this, every single medication out there has consequences. I mean, an aspirin, it's the wonder dog. It saved one of my friends when he had a heart attack. But at the same time, if you take too much aspirin, it may help you with arthritis, but it can give you an ulcer and bleeding, intestine and all these other sort of side effects. Everything has side effects, but we were told this doesn't have side effects. So my point was, and I said this right at the end, I said, look, if you can still get it, you can still spread it. Is that really a vaccine? And it should be up to individuals whether they want to take it or not. So someone sends that clip, just that part, not the 5-minute explanation ahead of time, and my legal analysis. They send it in, and the media is playing it. And my poor mom, who's lived through World War II, lived through communism, she's in her 80s and late 80s, and so she's watching her favorite shows, The Price is Right, and they do the teaser for the news. And there's the former health director in Arizona, and he's literally saying, Brnovich is going to get people killed. People are going to die because of him. And they're saying, and so they have all these experts saying all this terrible stuff about me. And the reason why I bring all that up is because what was so scary in some ways to me after COVID was not only the lockdowns, which I opposed, not only the infringement on individual liberty, not only the government trying to have you inject this, but it was the fact that the government, the federal government, was able to use the mainstream media, that was able to use doctors to essentially silence anyone that raised any sort of questions. Like when I raised the question about, look, you got to have skin in the game. Why can't you sue the manufacturers? They're exempted from lawsuits. I mean, one of the things that keeps, big corporate America honest is that fear that if they do something blatantly wrong, they're going to sue. And so they got exempted from that. So there's all these questions we weren't even allowed to ask, and we got canceled. And that's why if you look at that news conference, you have the media just jumping all over me just for suggesting that the president had no constitutional right to mandate a vaccine, that somehow I was the outlier. And it's like, whoa, take a step back. I'm not saying people shouldn't get the vaccine. I'm just saying the government can't mandate it. And there's a fundamental difference of understanding on that. And the fact that they got the mainstream media locally, nationally, and a bunch of doctors through Dr. Fauci to say that if somehow you disagreed with us, that you were the problem, you would be canceled, I think is really, really dangerous.
Before I let you go, because I'm bringing you back to talk about a couple of things, because I think one of the things that we, and especially I know the audience, all of you out there probably want to know is what can you do to continue to fight for American civil rights and for individual liberties? And I can't believe I'm saying that in 2023, but I feel like we are in a battle for our nation and our foundation and our Constitution. But what does the future look like for you, Mark? Where are you what are you planning on? Do you have political? Are you writing a book? What are you doing?
Well, I was trying to write a book, and then I broke my arm in Montenegro. So I've been trying to do some writing. Look, but I mean, I want to stay engaged on important public policy matters. But as you know, I was a prosecutor. I've argued at the Supreme Court, and so I also I've got a couple of offers from some firms, even national firms, and so I may end up trying to do some litigation. Getting back into the legal world, but I definitely want to stay involved in public policy. But I will tell you honestly, after the last time I ran, I mean, I have so many stories. We could do a whole hours of podcast versus the nastiness of what goes on there. And, the reality is that, people need to remember that, as Ronald Reagan used to say, I say this all the time, someone agrees with you 7 out of 10 times, 8 out of 10 times, they're not your enemy, they're your friend. And the Brnovich caveat to that is if someone agrees with you 10 out of 10 times, they're not your friend, they're not your spouse, they're surely not your teenage daughters, but they are someone you're paying. They're someone you're paying like a psychiatrist.
Right.
Because no one agrees with you all the time. And so we need to understand the perfect is the enemy of the good. And, you look at what happened here in Arizona, when you nominate like candidates that maybe have some issues, some flaws that, can't win, you end up with a hardcore lefty AG, you end up with lefty US senators. And so, it just shows you that the quality of candidates matter, and you can be principled, and still not make the perfect the enemy of the good. And we need to have good people in office. But I will tell you, based on what happened this last year, my wife and daughters are like, Dad, you better not run for anything again. And it was nasty. It was bad. I mean, it was nasty because I was getting arrows. You got to remember, the left feared me because I'm a principle rule all conservative. So the mainstream media and the lefties were always going after me. But then you had other folks that were going after me, from the right because, as I've told Donald Trump the worst decision he made was not endorsing me when I ran for the Senate. And so because I wasn't Trump's guy, I got attacked on the right from that. So I was getting arrows from all sides. And I would always tell people, it's like, I've sued Joe Biden more than anyone. I've sued President Obama over environmental regulations. I've written about property rights and the rule of law for decades. I was a real prosecutor. I did everything I could, to argue at the Supreme Court for election integrity, including a case called Brnovich v. DNC, which I argued myself, and we won, opening the door for states to pass common sense election integrity measures. And so I tried to be very principled. I always try to, be kind of reasoned with my rhetoric. It doesn't mean I can't rattle off some one-liners. And so I just hope people keep in mind as we move forward that we need to be principled, but we also need to have candidates that can win.
I'm so grateful that you're still in the fight, Mark, and you're going to be back on the show real soon. I know everyone loves to hear you. Whenever I have you on the show, I always get a lot of great messages from listeners, and I feel like you give a lot of great advice, but I totally, absolutely am with you on this. I totally disagree with your decision not to investigate the Travis Walton story. I'm going to have to fight with you on that. That's the one thing we don't agree on. No, we're going to reopen that. You and we are going to just whatever. We're going to do our own individual investigation into that. Because you just can't leave it like that. You just can't. You have to do it. Even if you're not the AG, you're just going to have to do it. I'm holding you to it.
I thought you were going to tell me I need to be AG again.
Well,
so
you do. You do need to be AG again so you could reopen the case. But we could just reopen it. We could just investigate it. We could be the media that we need to be when we need to be it. We can actually do an investigation.
Well, we've already become the people our parents warned us about.
Yeah, so, really. 100%. I know I am the greatest fear. Watch out. Anyways, I'm so happy you were on the show. I'll see you next time, my friend. And peace out. Thanks. And maybe we won't get abducted. Maybe we will, but who knows? Thank you so much, Mark, for being on the show with us today. I can't wait to get him back on. I'm going to bring him back on really soon. And by the way, I was very serious about looking into the Travis Walton story. That is something that I think I'm going to take upon myself. And I'm going to definitely fly to Arizona and talk to Mark about this because I think we need to investigate the Travis Walton story. There were so many important, I think, issues surrounding that case and this possible abduction that I would hate to see no one actually take the time to investigate it. I'm going to definitely do that. If you want to stay in the know and you want the biggest legal cases and the latest on UFOs, and by the way, just random information that will make you smarter, well, stay with the Sara Carter Show and download it. You got to tell your friends. You got to tell your family. We've got the most amazing guests, the most incredible people. I always feel so blessed and so much smarter after having them on, right? Like Mark Brnovich, like Trent Staggs, so many great guests this week that we've had on the show. And I hope that next week we bring even more on. Follow me on Truth at Sara Carter Official, on X at Sara Carter DC, and on Instagram at SCarterDC. God bless you. God bless our great nation. God bless investigative journalism, and God bless the great state of Texas.